Seconds. Yeah, so we are on. So first of all, thank you for everyone who joined us today. I know that we have, always so many alternatives in terms of programs, especially now that half of us are still at home. So thank you for choosing a Harut webinar. This is a series of webinars that we have launched a couple of weeks ago. We are trying to come every week with a new topic, with a new speaker, from all walks of life. So we're gonna have more like secular, more religious people, younger, more experienced people. So today we are going to talk about the Jewish unity or the lack of it thereof and how to tackle this question. So really thank you for everyone who joined. Please don't unmute yourself during the presentation. If you have anything to say, leave it in the comments and I'm going to moderate that in a way that I collect the questions and at the end I say it out and Joshua will answer. So before we get started, I want to ask our executive director, Karma, to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Parag, and thank you for all the wonderful people who joined us here on a Sunday afternoon, almost afternoon, late morning, to talk about Jewish unity. I think that the importance of this webinar is basically a result of the numbers that we see that the people that have come on. The people just don't understand how important this is. And we're willing to start small so that we get bigger because Jewish unity is at the base of everything. And Joshua, the national chairman of Cherut North America, will go into detail and discuss it. But this topic is the make it or break it. We were having a leadership discussion about an hour ago, and we were asked a very touchy question on Israel and religion. And one of the leaders in the group said, it's a matter of status quo, and it's also a matter of American Jewry respecting that Israel, that Israel has its way and we're not there. And that's a show of unity by saying, Israel has a situation, American Jewry, and we're all here for each other. And we're there for each other, but we also allow for each other to be. Unity is at the base of everything, and again, Joshua will discuss it. Cherut works tirelessly to unite Jews across the globe. Joshua is probably the best speaker on the topic and one who has a lot of experience and has written about it, and we're very, very blessed to have him speaking here today. And thank you, Virag, for presenting. Here, Joshua, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karma. Thank you, Virag, and thank you everyone for coming in today. Now, the title of my talk was The Challenge for Jewish Unity. It wasn't called Jewish Unity because it literally is a challenge for Jews to be united. And I want to share with you today that the anti-Semitism that we're seeing today, the terrorism, even Jews being very anti-Jewish, which has become more and more in fashion, is due to a lack of Jewish unity and just a lack of an overarching idea that, we need to work within the family first, not go elsewhere. And I'm also going to share with you 3 vital steps we can take to change this mindset to foster Jewish unity, because in the educational systems, in the different denominational streams, in all walks of life, this is not talked about. And in fact, the opposite is done. People quick to criticize, people are quick to point out, but this is not the fabric of the Jewish people anymore. And so with that, I want to start. So who am I? My name is Joshua Goldstein. I was a past delegate of the World Zionist Congress in the 36th, 37th, and now hopefully for the next one coming up. I've been a member for 12 years, but Karma would actually contest me on that. She thinks I think it's a little bit more. And currently I'm a chairman of Cherut North America. And, I just want to open up with, you hear this in conversation all the time. I would rather deal with a goyim, than have to deal with that type of a Jew. Or, I accept all Jews, but they really aren't Jewish because they didn't really convert properly. So I don't have to treat them with a mode of respect. People say religious cheat the government. What do you expect? All of those kind of Jews are like that. And then when, I was in school, I've heard we don't want to expose our children to those intolerant throwbacks. And people believe that they should love every single Jew. However, not the Jew who doesn't have the right type of head covering. We do not call those people Jewish, and we don't believe in them, so we don't accept them, and on and on and on, and any variation. And these are the things we hear all the time. So why do I do this? How did I get involved with this? Why did I get sensitized to this issue? I have a handicapped brother named Jeremy. He's currently living in Israel with my mom, and he's in a group home. But growing up, when we were younger, handicapped kids were marginalized. They weren't mainstreamed in most cases, and especially in the Jewish community. So growing up with a handicapped kid brought stigma. It brought friction. It didn't allow me to fit in to a quote unquote perfect little box that most people were growing up in. Today, it's a totally different picture. More than mainstream, they have camps. They have a Jewish camp for handicapped people. They have programs both in Israel and in certain parts in America and other places in the world, in the UK and other places that I know of. And it's mainstreamed. It's not something that's pushed aside. It's something that's relegated, for the back alley. And just to give you an example, I once had my brother on Yom Kippur, which is a hard day for most people. Particularly to sit through the services and to go through all that, but particularly for a person who's handicapped who has no structure. So he was like walking around the synagogue where we were at and praying, and someone told him that you either have to go into the groups, which are for little kids, and he's like in his 20s, or you need to go outside. And I tried to explain to him what his problem was, but the guy just didn't get it. So as a result, I said, I can't do this anymore. I can't go to a service when my brother is tracking around a place having nothing to do. So for the next 10 years, I went to and I brought him to a beginner service, and I even volunteered there just to find some way to get him to connect somehow. So then from this, my consciousness expanded because there are other people in walks of life who don't fit into the box. And working with Cherut, I've met so many wonderful people with so many diverse backgrounds and so many different types of people that, honestly, the way I was raised, people would not accept them as legitimate Jewish people. So that's why I got involved with this. That's why I got compassionate about this, because I was sensitized to this and I never kind of really fit in. And I think a lot of people, even within denominations and who aren't in denominations, kind of feel that they're a part of it. But if you're on this call, you kind of feel that there's something missing. And I think all of you would agree with that to some degree. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So division is found both on the left and the right. And the problem is it has become acceptable. We have separate shuls, and if you don't like that shul or temple, you'll make another one and another one and another one. And then you hear about people, Hasidim, spitting on girls whose modest dress is not meticulous enough to conform to religious standards, or you'll hear public denouncements of religious practices by more secular Jews. And you'll even have many Jews who are undermining the effort to support Israel. They may disagree with certain things, but it's gotten to such a level that there's actual hatred. And for many reasons, and we've talked about it, but that's how far this has gone. So my question to you is, a lot of people like to look to the past. Were Jews more unified in the past than they are today? And I would like to give you two examples. Unfortunately, we have a long history of divisiveness. And the first example I'd like to give was the time of the Second Temple destruction. Josephus Flavius writes how there was so much chaos prior to the Romans actually coming in and destroying the temple that it was just total lawlessness. And he talks about three rival gangs that terrorized the Jews in the old city. There was a group from this guy Elazar, another guy named John, another guy named Simon, and he goes on and how these people literally terrorized each other. They would kill each other who were on their turf. They wouldn't let Jews surrender. And had the Jews been able to surrender, there might have been a lot less casualties. One of the zealot groups burned all the food within the walls, and the famine knocked out a lot more Jews. And the Jewish, as a result of the Romans finally saying, okay, we're gonna take this over, many Jewish prisoners were strangled and garroted on their way to Rome. And if they say approximately 1,100,000 Jews could have been potentially saved. Now, there are different estimates of how many Jews lived at that time. Some people say there were 3 million. Some people say there were more, depending on the accounts, and not very reliable. But even if we went with the lowball number of 3 million, this is 1/3 of the Jewish population. And this, you can, and you know, it's just, it was just very upsetting to read this, whether you believe Josephus is a you know, his reliability. He's the only one we have writings on. And he writes that in his book of the Jewish War, how the citizens were under terrible fear. They didn't have any opportunity. He writes about all this stuff, and I put it up here. He even writes, like, if you look at, it says Jewish guards were set at all places and heads of robbers, although they were, I can't read it because it's cut off here, although they were, for guards, they were seditious, ones against the other in other respects, yet did they agree in killing those that were for peace with the Romans, or were suspected of an inclination to desert them, or as common enemies, they agreed in nothing but this, to kill those that were innocent. And this is very strong language. And it's unfortunate that we had the destruction of the temple, but it's even more unfortunate of the disunity and the chaos that literally ensued before all that. Now, so the question of the real tragedy of Tisha B'Av, is it really the destruction of the temple? Or is it really just that we haven't really learned how to get along? And when we mourn, of course, we need to mourn for all the terrible tragedies that happened, but I think we really need to be focusing more on other things. Like, I would love to see in Tisha B'Av to have communication classes, or have all sorts of classes to better people's ability to work with others, not just the traditional service, which is helpful, but it misses what we're still missing. Now, the second example I'd like to give is the Marranos. The Marranos, as everyone has probably read, were the new Christians who converted rather than leave in Spain. They were kind of living a double life, because even though they had converted, many of them had to wear, most of them had to wear special garb to show that they were new Christians. And they also were given new last names or surnames to differentiate them as new Christians. And as such, they were always suspect and always accused of being Christian. And those that were able to sneak or hide or do some of the Jewishness, they were kind of like they were just living in a bubble, and were doubly persecuted, because when some of those Marranos were able to escape, there was negative treatment of these Marranos by other Jews. For example, in Sfat, Israel, a guy named Rabbi Jacob Barab, he imposed flagellation upon Marranos who returned to Judaism as punishment for transgressing the prohibitions that rendered them liable for early death. I'm sorry, hang on. I'm just trying to read this. And also excommunication in their previous condition. But since flagellation or whipping could only be imposed by an ordained dayan or Jewish judge, Jacob Barab and his colleagues wanted to enforce punishment when these Marranos came back and were given smicha for those who were rabbis. So it just very well thought out negative treatment of the Marranos by Jews. In one instance. Another example is the term Sephardic tahor. There was a suffix created by many Sephardim to distance themselves from Marranos who came to live with them once they escaped or were able to leave. The Hebrew letters of Samach and Tet, where we stood for Sephardi tahor, which meant they were pure Spanish Jew blood to pure blood. So they were trying to basically, an attempt, distance themselves from Marranos, and to, in effect, saying, in this family, there are no Marranos here because they don't really belong here. So Sephardic Jews had it bad on both ends. If those who were able to leave, they were persecuted by the Christians. They also were not looked or treated very kindly by many of the Jewish groups who saw them as sellouts. And finally, Dukan no more. In some communities, Marranos who were Kahanim, who did the priestly blessing, were no longer able to Dukan and during the priestly prayers. And in some of the Ashkenazim communities, rabbis tried to fight against this, but public sentiment as you know, shul politics always overrules those of people who are trying to do some good. So they weren't even allowed to come back and take part of the service as a Kohen. So a lot of people ask, like, I've been really looking and thinking, what are the causes for Jewish hatred? And one of the biggest ones, there are three big ones that I found. The first one is religious differences. You know, the Orthodox feel that the Torah was divinely inspired, and therefore they have to live by the precepts and follow the rules as based on that thinking. And therefore any changes, major changes, are not accepted by the Orthodox because they feel they need to keep the tradition the way they observe it. Reform, however, feels that the Torah was not divinely inspired, and therefore they have the ability to change things and work towards social justice and social peace, and therefore the Orthodox look at the Reform as heretics, as people who aren't keeping the faith, and the Reform look at the Orthodox as non-egalitarian, throwbacks, people who are impeding the Jewish acceptance into larger society, the larger society. So the first and foremost, if you've been to Israel, and you know, you could see these differences among the secular and the religious. It's very apparent there. So religious differences, as you know, is the first peg in the hole. Now the second one is inherent fear. The Orthodox feel that if they expose their kids to other streams or other types of thinking, that these people will lose faith and not be part of it or assimilate themselves. And the Reform feel that the Orthodox has nothing of value. They don't want their kids going to programs in Israel that will expose them to anything of a traditional Jewish ritual or values, or even rituals or thought, because they're afraid that they will then come back and start become more religious. So there is a major inherent fear that people have of one another. And number three, and I think this is probably the biggest one, is apathy and assimilation. These are the big ones. I'm just going to share with you something. 30%, I don't have it here, but yes, according to a Pew study, 30% of American Jews are unaffiliated with any movement, and they care even less about their Jewishness. 30% is almost 1/3 of Jews ignored in America. So while Orthodox and Reform and all the streams are fighting and really getting into it, we are missing a big, quiet, silent group that's not even there. The Orthodox feel that time is on their side, and if they just wait, that the Reform will assimilate and quote unquote assimilate into the woodwork, and they don't have to deal with them. And according to the Pew study, there is some truth to that, because 28% of Reform Jews have actually left the fold. Again, a number closer to the 30% or even a third of our Jews. So while the Reform are pushing hard on social justice issues, egalitarianism, immigration reform, prison reform, they are losing a lot of the people who are in their ranks. And the Orthodox don't even want to deal with anyone who's not the color or the shape or size of their kippah or yarmulke. And so this is probably the biggest problem that faces us today, and is one of the biggest problems that we have when we try to explain Israel to them. Because if you're growing up apathetic or assimilated, you're getting influenced by the media and how they portray Israel. And as a result, Israel is just another apartheid state. And that's why we can have Jewish people like Noam Chomsky and Jews for Obama and J Street and groups like that are really pushing to really push the other side of the picture against Israel. Now, there was something that really changed my life in all of this, because, you know, being nice to other people is all good, but there was a Kabbalist, guy who writes about Kabbalism named Michael Lightman. He's in Israel. He's a prolific writer about Kabbalah, and particularly of this Rav Yehuda Ashlav. And we had a discussion on YouTube where why is it necessary for Jews to unite? And he's written many, many books, and I've read many of them. His contention that all anti-Semitism is directly related to Jewish hatred. It's not that, oh, those people out there hate us, and therefore we have to do something against them as a reaction to them. We are actually engendering the anti-Semitism. And he said, basically, without getting into all of his explanations on Kabbalah and how Kabbalah is more the spiritual side of the religion that's not really integrated in our society today, it's there. And they basically talk about the rise of the ego and all the problems that can arise from the ego, both on a personal level, on a nation statehood level, and on a world level. And he talks all about it, and I'm not going to go all into it, but he talks about Abraham and Moshe, and he talks about all these groups and how this whole idea of nurturing community and nurturing bonds of community, both within the Jewish people and with all the other nations of the world, was super, super important, and is directly responsible for the anti-Semitism if we don't do it. And he talks about how we have Islam on one hand, and we have Christianity on the other hand, that are like they're opposing forces that are there to keep us in line when we get too far astray. But I found his work very fascinating because it gave both a practical, political, and realpolitik idea of why we need to be Jewish. It's not just a nice thing anymore. And we also learn from a very spiritual side, or a very religious side, if you have I use the words interchangeably, to really put this back on the map for Jewish people. Because if you think about it, according to what he's saying, the more we fight, the more division, the more hatred that we have towards each other, the higher the anti-Semitism grows. And the more that we could start to learn how to work together, the less the anti-Semitism will be there. And it's not that it's something that's being done outside to us, but it's like we have this little tuning fork that the harder we hit it with the hatred, the more this vibrates and causes other nations to fight and attack us. So it took the whole idea of anti-Semitism and put it in a very different light. It made it very reflexive and based, and put a lot of responsibility back on us to be more tolerable to other people. So when I named this the challenge for Jewish unity, it's really a personal challenge. We are all culpable. We are all responsible for letting the hatred continue. We have to acknowledge that the current situation cannot continue to exist. And we need to develop our self-awarenesses against our biases towards other Jews. And I'm still deprogramming what I hear in my head all the time to just accept other people. However, that doesn't mean you need to roll over. It means you can still keep your beliefs, but without all this hatred. You know, when people start saying this is the cause for all the problems, you know that that's a problem in and of itself, because it's never just one little thing, and it's never just one person, but it contributes to. So I wanted to go over 3 tools for connecting the family. And when I say 3 tools, this is stuff we should have learned in schools. We should have learned in camps. We should have learned from teachers. We should have learned from educators, but they have not come up to the task. We have this little funky idea that we should love each other as you love yourself, and all Jews are brothers, but it doesn't go further than that. And it really has not made a substantial impact on the level of the hatred that we have towards each other. So I want to share 3 interesting things that I found. The first one is from a psychologist, Les Carter. He talked about imperative thinking. When angry people attempt to force their way upon others, they have a pattern of thought called imperative thinking. And this can be applied to both sides, the right and the left. They use words like, you have to do this, you must do this, you can't do this, you should do this, you're supposed to do this, you ought to do this, you had better do this or else, and you need to do this or X is going to happen. And I can tell you just from my Jewish education, I still hear these voices saying those same things. And people with imperative thinking, who are angry or have imperative thinking, think they assume that they have the prerogative to control others. They can be pushy and forceful when they communicate with others. They use repetition when trying to make a point. They maintain such strong opinions that any form of compromise is difficult. And the main thing is they refuse to hear others because they're so self-focused on their perception of all that matters. And there's a lot of critical thinking. Now, we all think like this in one way or another when we get heated up on an issue, but he's talking about this as a phenomenon that people have in for angry people. So he talked about adopting a freedom thinking mindset. Like that freedom means that each person has the privilege to choose how they want to live in any place, time, or structure. Free will distinguishes us humans from other forms of creation. Our Creator endowed each person with the privilege to choose how he or she will live. When we're younger, of course, we don't really know how to choose wisely, so we can't really have unbridled freedom. We need limits and authority, but they need to guide and show consequence and how to live within a group's established norms. So he talked about adopting a freedom thinking mindset, the thinking that gives people the ability to recognize their opportunities to choose who they want to be and how they want to live. Otherwise, people rebel and they just want a way out. And when there's conflict and anger over particular heated issues, you can stand up for what you believe. And this doesn't say be a pushover, but at the same time, you got to leave room for the others to choose for themselves how to integrate what you have communicated. 9 times out of 10, when people are really angry and fired up, they're not hearing you anyhow. So, you know, I think like when we try to educate people about Israel and the truth about Israel, and that it's not an apartheid state, and the real truth of having a Palestinian state, you know, we need to do this continually to counter all the negative criticism, but we don't have to get to the point where we're throwing dirt at each other. Now, there was a woman named Itka Zygmuntowicz. Last year in 2019, feels forever ago with the COVID, I picked up Karma, she came in from Israel, and we went to a Bucks County Jewish fair, and I believe it was at the JCC. During that time, we were handing out flyers, giving out Nick information, talking to people. And this one woman, Itka, that's her name, she was this older woman. She literally came up to me from nowhere. Her son was trailing behind her, and she pulls up her sleeve and she says, "Look, I was a survivor." And she shows me her tattoos. And she goes, "Would you please buy my book for me?" And this is just out of nowhere. And I was thrown back and I said, you know, what the hell, I'll buy her book. In fact, Devora bought the book. She wanted to buy it. So otherwise I would have bought it, but she bought it. I said, "Itka, could you sign it for me?" Itka seemed to me an older woman, an anxious woman. She said, "You got to hear my story. You got to hear this from me." So I felt compelled to read it, but I let Devora have it. And then Devora she sent it to me and I read it. And I was reading this over Pesach when I was doing my own Seder alone. I wasn't with family. I wasn't with anyone. You know, we're all literally isolated by ourselves. And this book really started to really hit me when I started thinking, when I came to the next one of the paragraphs in her book. I mean, she was talking about how they were growing up and in Poland, and then they were put into the camps, and how she had to survive everything. And then after the camps, it's a small book. It's not I thought it'd be a lot thicker than it was, but it wasn't as bad as most, unfortunately, if you could call it bad, all the Holocaust books are. But she comes to this one point where she is being separated from her mother, and she's had other brothers and sisters, and they were in Auschwitz, and they were going to be separated, and the mother knew that she had to be with the kids, so she was sent left. And here's what happened. Itka writes, "At that point, I watched helplessly as they took my father away. Next, they took away," I can't read it because it's a little blocked here. I'm just going to move this. "They took away my little brother Shrulik and my little sister Zissel. My mother and I were sent to the group that would ultimately go to the camp as forced laborers. It was at this point that my mother's Menschlichkeit was ultimately tested. When she saw the Nazis take away my little brother and sister, my mother turned to me and said," and this is the pivotal point of the whole book, "It Kolo," that's her full name, "you are a big girl. I have to go with the little children. I can't leave them alone. Remember, my child, no matter what will happen to you, don't become bitter and hateful. Don't let them destroy you." This would be her last message to me. And then in the book, her mother was gassed a few minutes later in the Birkenau crematorium, and Ika was separated and sent to work in a forced labor unit during the selection process. Now, this was just, besides being tear-jerking, this was, I felt like she was in the room with me, and she was saying, like, why would someone deal with being a mensch when you have these murderers who are killing you? And this is what she said. And throughout the book, for Itka, every time they did something bad to her, they had her dig ditches, they would do just terrible things to her. She would always say, I'm not letting them take away my dignity. I'm not letting them take away, making me an animal so that I hate them. And many Jews they lived for hate, they lived for revenge. You know, they had to live for something or they wouldn't make it in the camps. But for her, she kept it really, she said, I cannot give up my dignity or my menschlichkeit and be like them and hate them. And it was just truly incredible response that I heard from her. So the second tool that I learned from this was that we have to preserve honor. We need to practice Itka's philosophy of menschlichkeit. For Itka, it was simply survival and living, not revenge, not hatred. And she had every right to do that. And more than anyone, they were more justified than anyone to do that. And for us, it can mean creating a better life, accepting others despite their differences and their stupidities. And we can keeping Jews together should be the overriding principle. We should reserve our menschlichkeit. And that's really what I got from that. And it was very emotional because I was sitting in my living room reading this all by myself, and I read this paragraph over and over and over. And throughout the book, she comes back to talking about her menschlichkeit and not treating people like garbage, and preserving and really basically treating people really well. And it was like she literally was talking to me as if she was sitting next to me. So this tool of developing a trait of honor is my next tool. In Musser, the definition of honor is the ability to recognize the humanity in other people, to feel empathy, and to treat them with respect, divinity, and even with reverence. So what does that really mean? So if you have too little honor, you can easily find fault with one another. It's easy to judge others unfavorably. The only way, it says in the Talmud that the only way to gain honor is by honoring other people. Ben Zoma in the Talmud said, who honors, it should be honors, one who honors others, not who gets honor, but who gives it. So be mindful of how often you judge others. Does it make you feel angry, superior to others? Does it fill you with a sense of snobbery? How much honor can you give someone within the context of a non-shouting conversation? On the other side, you have too much honor, being excessive flattery, being obsequious, always praising others even when they don't deserve the praise. That's too much honor, and people do that too. So we kind of need to develop the balance in the trait of honor. If you see to the left, if you give people very little honor or respect, you're basically rude. If you give them too much and you're flattering too much, you're basically too much. So again, we have to look the idea of developing the balance of the honor in the middle ground. Now, I wanted to share with you a very interesting thing that I read when trying to put this together. Theodor Herzl died, and Rav Kook, who made Aliyah 2 months before the passing of Herzl, on July 3rd, 1904, on the 20th of Tammuz, he was appointed as a newly installed rabbi of the Jaffa port, and he was told, you have to do a eulogy for Herzl. Now, Herzl was very influential, as we know, in creating the idea of the state, but he was very secular. And Rav Kook was actually a yeshiva-trained rabbi who studied in Lithuania. He had a rabbiship in England for a while, and then he came before the state was even born into Jaffa, and he was asked to give a eulogy. So we have one person who's very religious. One person who's totally secular, and according to Jewish law, basically, when people are quote unquote off the path, when they die, if the person's in your family, you can't mourn for them, as it says in the bold. You have the brothers and their relatives have to wear festive garments and even eat and drink, and basically go like this to the person who was doing that. So we have now a perfect example of creating Jewish unity or not creating Jewish unity. What did Rav Kook do? So let's find out. So in his eulogy, he, let's get to that. In his eulogy, Rabbi Kook really, he did something very interesting. He melded both parts of it. So he said that there exists two messianic leaders. There's two Mashiachs or Messiahs. One that is the material and one is more the spiritual. And ideally, we'd have the blending of both body and soul. And the second point he said was that the person who really epitomizes the materialistic side of Jews being successful and working to develop a state and doing things like that was Joseph. Joseph, as you know, he was appointed the Chancellor of Egypt. He saved people from all over the civilized world at that time from famine. He spoke 70 languages. He literally had the universal language. And he was able to work in the world and yet protect his own people, who were the 70 people who came down with his father. And then so he said that Judah represented the spiritual side, and that so then we have all of the religious teachings around that, and David was able to sort of combine the two. And then he goes a split further. He said when the Jewish kingdom split into two, the north and the southern kingdoms, these two aspects were given. One was in the north, so that Jeroboam was the head of the materialistic side of the developing a state and a nation, and that the Davidic kingdom was one that was more related to the spirituality. So he said in the future, we will need to have both. And he was able to explain that we can coexist. Rav Kook spoke how this we need both modernity, we needed a nation state, we needed people who were ready for that, and also we needed religious guides and spiritual guides, and we needed that as well. And if you look at Rav Kook's other teachings, he pulled it off. He pulled this one off. He did the perfect blend of Jewish unity, and if you want, you can look this up. It's a beautiful thing to read. Rabbi Kook could have been narrow-minded based on his yeshiva training, but because he later learned some Kabbalistic teachings, it gave him a universal view of what the new state should be like. He even said, or he felt that creating the Jewish state was not a state so everyone could shoot fireworks and just have a national flag, or just everyone should wear a kippah and learn in yeshiva. He said that is not the purpose of the Jewish state. He said the purpose of the Jewish state was literally to recreate a community of Jews. So according to his eyes, if Jews could agree on how the municipality was going to transport garbage out of the town, he said that was a holy mitzvah. So he took a very big worldwide view, and it's unfortunate today that we have this perceived split of religious and non-religious, when if you look at the teachings, both of Rabbi Kook and later on of Herzl, he wasn't as secular as you think he was. He understood that there was a need for the traditions, even though he wasn't religious. So there was an understanding of both. There was an open-mindedness to both. There was a generalized sense of unity. This is what we need to do, and that everybody had their part in which way that they felt they needed to go in order to do that. So, and tool number 3 is it's very hard to find fault with. It's very easy to find fault with people, but finding points of agreement, even if they're very slim, is critical for this. You might not agree on two-state or single-state solution, but there has to be something you can agree upon. So I always ask, when you're in a conversation and it's going south, what can you do to salvage a conversation? And I always say, what percentage of agreement can I have with this guy? So, well, we both agree that the state of Israel is our past and history, and we need to cherish. I mean, there has to be something. So, and I always ask, what percentage are you in on this? Most times we're 100% against. In your mind, I always say, am I 10% in agreement with him? Am I 110% not in agreement with him? Where can I find some agreement, and how can I listen to them, even if I totally disgusted by what they say, at least give them the ability to let them talk, because if you don't let them say what they feel or what they've been taught, you can never really influence anyone if you just shout them out. So they're developing the ability to listen to the opposite viewpoint and to state your case respectfully is really the way we're going to win hearts and minds on this and combat all the negative PR against Israel and the Jewish people now at large. So I wrote an ebook on this, but some of the benefits of unification can be very material. Like, for example, many people are discussing the difficulties of raising a kid and having a Jewish education and the expenses to that. If all streams of Jews were able to start putting in money when their kids are just born, there could be a trust fund made, and the money could be pooled and invested properly so that money could be made available so schools wouldn't be struggling. Temples and synagogues won't be broke all the time. There could be shared charity and educational programs, and of course, better employment opportunities. And of course, there could be some way of uniting Jews around the idea that Israel is a good thing and Israel deserves to exist, and it shouldn't be destroyed and ripped apart like most people are doing. So I put together like 4 commandments for Jewish unity. The personal challenge is making unity the overriding principle. So the first one is don't diss a brother or sister. That's disrespect. Be firm in your beliefs and practices, but keep the greater idea of Jewish unity in mind. Don't just try to rip them apart. Allow for healthy debate, but you have a right for self-respect. So when they start rapidly backbiting you, you can stop. And then number 4, tread lightly. Your treatment of other Jews will affect how other Jews will affect us and the level of anti-Semitism that will affect us. And I never saw this anywhere, but every year around Pesach, they always talk about interfaith Pesach Seders. I have never seen an interstream Passover Seder, where it's so glorified that we should speak with other groups and share our culture with them. Why can't we have an interstream, like a interdenominational Pesach Seder, not just an interfaith Seder? And so I made up a Jewish unity motto. I grew up on comic books, so you have to forgive me. I had to find something to ring into this. So to defeat the forces of evil, I move towards the light. We have to embrace one another without the strife. And finally, to conclude, we have a long way to go. We have to start with the first step. I don't expect 95% of people to even resonate with this at all. It's not the in thing, but the people who are on this webinar, the people who think about this or are sensitized to this, we are the ones to start. It's very interesting. I've met people who seemingly ultra-Orthodox and religious, and they have the most open mindset that I've ever seen. And then I've met people who are absolutely secular, who I think would hate religion. They have a respect for it. So I think it's an individual. It's if those people are just who they are. And unfortunately, we have to kind of raise ourselves up of how we were taught and brought up. And we need to start making an impact and a change. So I would like to eventually do a little more of a reaching out to a Jew you never knew and you never cared to, that I put that in parentheses, as one of my projects. So we can actually have Jews see that, yes, Jews can interconnect with other Jews and it's not such a dirty word. So I'd like to thank everyone for listening. And now, of course, if you have any questions and feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Joshua, thank you so much. I really learned a lot from you, and I heard you presenting this before, but I always learn. So we have some comments, not necessarily questions. If you can open the chat box, that would be the easiest, because you have some comments that maybe you can have your own remark on. And in the meantime, if anyone has any specific questions, feel free to raise.
Joshua, it's Jeff. Do you find that, at least in the United States, a lot of the disagreement has more to do with American politics than religion? I mean, I wrote the comment that personally, I agree with Rabbi Aiden Steinsaltz's version of what a good Jew is. Do you know what that is?
Go ahead, share it.
A good Jew is someone who wants their grandchildren to be Jewish. That's it. And to me, that covers all types of Jews, whether you're secular, non-secular. I'm not the Jewish police. That's what God's for. But I do find that a lot of criticism between the groups has more to do with American politics than anything.
Well, it's a good point. I think you're right. The politics are very divisive, but I think it goes back to the idea America has become the idea of America, rugged individualism. I have the right to be angry. America was brought up with religious groups fleeing persecution. So there's a lot of that individuality that I think has gone out of bounds. And it manifests in politics, absolutely, because look, we can't even agree in American politics. We can't even agree to what the news is. Left is right, right is left. Everything's filtered and said differently. We can't even get just basic facts straight because people want to reinterpret the facts. So I would agree with you. It's definitely reflected in politics, but I think it has a lot to do with our American individualism ideals have gone to the absurd because of political correctness and other ideals.
Don't you think that part of it is also non-political groups have become political? Like when the ADL said, don't criticize Obama?
Yes.
Or actually when they, when I was writing about, what's his name? The Muslim congressman who became in Minnesota, who wanted to be.
Elon.
No, the other one that wanted to be the chairman of the Democratic Party. I wrote about him being anti-Semitic, and I get something from, Greenblatt saying, you should lay off him. Well, no, but it's really all politics. It has nothing to do with Judaism.
No, I agree with you. It has nothing to do with Judaism. It's like, again, taking our crazy, you're right, sticking to politics where it doesn't belong. Being so individualistic that you will destroy your nation or destroy your Jewish people. It's everywhere. It's crazy. I agree with you, but I would say it has to do more with a lot of political correctness, not just saying what the facts are. We can't even agree on them, and then having an honest discussion about it. That individualism has gone up to the point of delusion.
Anyone else has any specific questions, or Joshua, do you see any comments that you want to respond to? Like Carlos is saying, it's more the ultra-Orthodox. I feel that distinction is important. I think that's pretty much you were in agreement with.
Yeah, nobody is talking about this. Everyone's lauding their group over the other one and pointing out the faults of the other people. But I'm just going to start waving the flag, and I think we all can calm down a little bit, and we have to start pushing and reach out to another Jew, and just slowly. We're not here to proselytize people to your type of religion, of Jewish representation. And I think it's important that people understand that the more you learn about your Judaism, whatever stream however you interpret it, I think the more comfortable you'll feel, and you won't have the need to then shout other people down and tell them what they should do and how they should live. That's rooted in a lot of anxiety, or there's no rootedness in their understanding of the text. So I think I don't think religion is divisive. I think it's how you teach the religion, and then ultimately how you practice it, that can be very divisive. I think the more you learn, the more educated you are, the more you can actually find commonality, as opposed to just doing that one little thing that you've learned. That's a nil of knowledge is very dangerous. A lot of knowledge is more balancing.
Hi, can I jump in there?
Just one more sec, Sandra. There is a comment from Carlos that is directly related to this one. And that is like, how do you actually approach the Orthodox when they throw stones at people that don't think like them? It's a really good question. And me, myself, even though I'm not Jewish, but the Network Carta members, they did spit on me at one point in Manhattan. So it's like, it's totally shocking for me. I even asked them, so you spit on me in the name of God and love, and like they are a special group. But so I think this question is very important. So I let you actually reflect on that.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, they're wrong. I mean, that's not the ultimate spiritual teaching, because, and you think they spit on you, Virag, because you're not Jewish. They spit on.
They didn't know that.
Well,
Like
they spit on all of us. They spit on me. They would not, because that's just with us. You should see how they spit on their own. Like, I once met a mother who lived in Lakewood. She was divorced, which was unheard of in their community, and her kid was in the yeshiva, and her mother said she would go bring her kid roller skating, and if the kid was found roller skating, the kid would be expelled from school. And if the mother was found without wearing a certain type of tights, her kid would automatically be rejected from the school. So it's if you think they're treating you bad, the craziness even extends to the level of dress and what is kosher. I mean, if Moshe Rabbeinu came down, I don't know what they think of him. He wouldn't fit to their standard at all. And his wife, Zipporah, forget it. She'd be spit on. It's like crazy. So I agree. I can't explain. I can understand what they do, but I don't condone it. I don't agree with it. No, it's absolutely the opposite of what we need to be learning.
Indeed. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Oh, thanks. I just want to go back to the previous discussion about, the American politics and how it's reflected and how we reflect it. And I just want to, just Joshua, or look at it in another way. I think what's been happening in the United States, political wise, is the hyper individualism that you think you see. I think the problem is exactly the opposite. I think as people have law, and I'm totally secular, I'm just not religious at all, but I see this happening. And what's happened is, as people lose their connection to the more traditional beliefs, and Jews and other traditional beliefs as well, they actually search out other beliefs, and they get into this groupthink, and where we are, and they create secular religions. And where we are now, it's not hyper individualism as much as it is tribal groupthink. People have taken their sides, no longer respecting individual choice. That's what I keep coming up against. It's us or them to a hyper degree. Everyone who doesn't agree with your version of the group, your group think, is not just wrong, they're evil. And that's, to me, and that, I think it's exacerbated or exaggerated within our community, the Jewish community, which has in the diaspora, which has caused so much contention, and it's totally reflected in our wider politics in the United States. I'm seeing this every single day, and I'm constantly trying to, open up a discussion. And the attacks that I get personally for suggesting that maybe the people, for example, who want to open up the economy, and those protests, that no, these are not stupid, evil people who want you to die. These are people who have a reason for wanting to get the economy going. Right. And those are valid reasons, even if we may not agree on their tactics. So this hyper partisanship is a form of religious adherence. It's just not our religion.
I agree with Sandra, and I'd like to add to that. I think it comes from the outside in. Anybody living in the United States knows what Joe Biden, his gaffe from Friday. when he said that, well, if you're black
Right.
and you vote for Trump, then you're not really black.
You ain't black. Yep.
Well, yeah, I'm
Eight,
sorry.
yes.
But
Yeah.
if
I mean, it's got to be offensive or else it's not really good.
but what he's saying is that the blacks are going to vote for him, whatever. Well, my contention is that 35 years ago, there was a Secretary of State named James Baker who said, F the Jews, they won't vote for us anyway. And now the Democratic Party feels, F the Jews, they're going to vote for us whatever we do. And I think that the blind loyalty of much of the Jewish people in this country to the Democratic Party and their goals actually promotes anti-Semitism, because they can do whatever they do.
Yes.
I mean, if you look what happened when Rep. Omar made those anti-Semitic statements, and the Democrats in Congress weren't allowed to criticize her. They had to come up with a statement that said, you know, be nice to everybody. And it had really nothing to do with anti-Semitism. That's really what we're facing, and I think that's also part of the difference between the split between Jews. I mean, it comes obviously by the way I talk. You can tell I have a very strong feeling about it, and I have a very strong feeling that I don't have a problem with people being different from me politically. I have a problem with people being different from me politically without thinking it through.
Spot on.
I'm willing, because look, I married someone who's a Democrat, okay? And she's, in most things, she's smart, much smarter than I am, but she's thought it through. And just to be blind loyalty, I don't believe in that for anything.
Yep.
So Sandra, just to get back to your point, which is a really good one, if we have this group think, would you within the Jewish community, we have probably 5 or 6 different, a couple, like 2 or 3 different streams of it, and it's so polarized that you're right. People would not even dare go out of their box or way of thinking to even just have this community. Is that what you're, that would be the ultimate extension of that?
Right. You know, it's become a moral thing, other than, you know, this is the good way to do things, this is the right way to do things, this is the wrong way to do things, and we can discuss and come to the middle, because that's what, you know, politics should, in this country, should be about, you know, negotiating toward, you know, the middle. But now it's become sort of a moral divide. You're not just wrong, you are evil, and it has to be all one way or all the other. And it's basically a mindset that has infected Jews, even I think to a greater degree, because a lot of Jews, especially secular Jews, and even some, you know, who are observant that I know, it's like you have to be a good person or else, you know, which means worrying about everyone else but ourselves.
Right.
And that has become, yeah, it's like, you know, my definition of a self-hating Jew has come to the realization they don't hate themselves, they love themselves. What their self-hating is about.
Spot on, Sandy. Spot on.
They do the work of the anti-Semites, so that anti-Semites don't have to work so hard.
Right. And how crazy is that?
Very.
Yeah.
It's insane.
So
Thank you so much for everyone's input. I like to keep these webinars really like short and to the point, because in this way we respect each other's time as well. And I think it was informative enough. You can always find us, you know, either on social media or you can email us. We are always happy to answer your question. I see that Robert had a point. Joshua is seeing that, so in case he wants to respond, he can. But the final word is going to be Karma's. So we just want to close and really thank you so much again for joining. Karma, it's you.
isn't it wonderful to always have the final word? Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, everyone. I think the number of participants is something that, again, shows that people are either unaware. I don't know if it's apathy, but it's something that needs to be, pushed forward and brought to the forefront. This whole issue of Jewish unity is, it can make us or break us, I believe. I honestly believe in that. And one of the things that Virag, who thinks faster than everyone in a good way, in a really great way, was that she wrote to me, now it's time to push the ebook, because we really need to create a platform for this and to start spreading this. We want to do this again next time, to have 30 people come on and discuss and come. And I'm having a conversation, it was funny, a texting back and forth with the son of one of the great veteran Cherutniks, who asked me something about the Kotel and why we're not involved with that. And I said, we deal with Jewish unity all the time. We pick our battles. So this is a battle that we have chosen. It's a challenge. It's in a really good way. Joshua's Mishigas in a very positive way, and I have utmost respect for him being on it all the time, and for really doing it so beautifully and so well. And the presentation is just so amazing and informative. Those who haven't joined or haven't established activity yet, I invite you to join and to email us, to fill in a membership form, become a member. But I also urge those who are of our leadership to, emphasize the importance of Jewish unity to other people, bring in more people. If you have anyone who has questions, send them to office@cherutna.org. And we need to get more people exposed to this information. That's what we need to do. So a lot of the people that were on board today were members, which is always a pleasure, because I feel that's almost a partial internal training seminar. And now we can go out and spread it. And the people that came on, Carlos has already texted me that hopefully we're going to be in touch. Maybe in next Congress we'll have a delegate from Mexico, guys. So God willing. So I really want to thank you all. Thank you, Virag, for hosting, and thank you, Josh, for presenting. And it's such a pleasure and such a blessing and a privilege to be part of this group.
Thank you, everyone. Shavuot tov. Enjoy the
Thank
rest.
you. Have a lovely week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. You
Bye
too.
now.